Mic's on, please, guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the South Kingstown Town Council. This is the night when we're going to discuss the preliminary budget adoption and do it. First order of business is the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Council President Collins.
Here.
Council Vice President DeCruz.
Here.
Councilwoman Kelso.
Here.
Councilman McAtee.
Here.
Councilman Veely.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, as you can see, is a resolution adopting the FY 2019-2020 Town Council preliminary budget. Given the overwhelming community interest in this subject, we're going to entertain some more public comment on it. We're going to do that now, so if you'd like to say anything about this budget, how you'd like to see it changed, added, subtracted, you name it, please come to the podium, state your name for the record, and then we'll have our discussion about where we're going to go with it.
My name's Greg Sweet. During one of the school committee meetings, they were talking about letting 7 to 12 TAs go, and I believe that was the number. One of the members didn't want to do that because they thought it would hurt the local economy. I also believe it was said that night that people around town, if they voted to let them go, they'd have a hard time facing the people if they saw them in town. And I think that's ridiculous. They were all elected to do a difficult job at hand, and that's making things affordable. Safety in the school was also a topic that was discussed. Because of our inadequate system currently used in the town, there are severe problems. If there were a problem inside the high school and an officer had to radio for help, they couldn't do it because of no signal. The coverage in the south end of South Kingstown also has poor reception. If an officer was in a conflict, which did happen, they can't radio to get help for backup. That's pretty severe. To me, both can be a matter of life and death and need to be addressed now. I believe the new communication system that they want to implement is $1.5 million. Ambulance response times in South Kingstown are up to 20 minutes, depending on the situation and the location of the problem. A new vehicle and staff is needed to provide adequate services to South Kingstown residences. We expect and deserve these services. Last week, Rory chastised the school committee for not doing what they were directed to do, and I give him credit for that. He said they give him a gift of 2% instead of sticking to the 1.25% that he had said previously. Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't want anybody to give such an expensive gift on my behalf. Our school system has been losing funding because the school committees refused to close schools. 10 years ago, we warned that this would happen, and now here we are. The school systems created their own financial problems. Our emergency response departments have been doing the best they can under the budgets the town has given them. It's time to adequately support our emergency responders, and if that means level funding or a minimal increase for the school committee, then that's what needs to be done. There are other projects in town that need to be done, such as roads. The town council needs to step up and do the right thing for everybody in town. Thank you.
My name is J.C. Northup, and I'm a resident, and I'm also on the school committee. I wanted so badly to begin with something positive, but after days of thinking about it, I couldn't come up with one thing. Leaving here last Wednesday night, I felt like a scolded child. I don't like that feeling, and I don't feel as if I deserve to be spoken to in the manner in which we, the school committee, were spoken to by certain members of the town council. Deb Kelso and Rory McEntee both yelled at us and threatened to not fund the schools because we didn't do what they told us to do. We did not take the directive given and bring back a suitable presentation. You could both stand to be reminded that you have not been in your seats on the council any longer than some of us have held our positions. Your job is not one of authority over the school committee, but is to work collaboratively with them to ensure we are all making the best choices for everyone. I respectfully ask that when you address me or anyone from that seat, please do not yell. If your voice is loud naturally, then please recuse yourself from the use of the microphone. I'm not going to stand here and tell you all the reasons you should give the school department the 2.5% property tax transfer. You have received multiple emails and many others spoke last week. You have heard a lot more support in favor of funding the schools than not funding them. The school committee was accused by the council of not putting in the work to bring down the budget. Simply not true. We worked long and hard to make cuts we thought everyone could live with. We looked at what 1% really looked like, and it failed to fit with our mission, what we are tasked with. We most certainly did not blatantly disregard the request of the council. I did not like the insinuation of the same. Our meetings are public and broadcast live on board docs. It is time for us to stop looking at the past, except to learn from the mistakes made. Everyone needs to accept the fact that the majority are supportive of the 4 elementary school model and want to roll with that for as long as we are able, enrollment dependent. The closing of a school was never going to affect this year's budget anyway. We do have a long-term plan, the legacy plan. We paid $150,000 for it. It's still the plan. We simply chose a different option, the option so many were in favor of and fought so hard for. We have not thrown away all the work done before us. We are still very much in the process of securing the funding to update our facilities. Changes can and will be made along the way. Please provide the schools with the 2.5 property tax transfer so we can keep providing an amazing education for our youngest residents. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Jim O'Neill from Matunic. I've done this on and off for the last 20 some odd years. And this is the first time that I can really explicitly say this is pure malfeasance on the part of the school committee. I heard of no deliberations talking about the financial crisis and costs over the next 5 years from the school committee. Only one person, Kate. You're the only one that said, we've got to look at the entire town. And she was right on the money. In budget negotiations, there's a give and take. All they want is more. What are they giving up? Could have easily closed Curtis Corner School. I've begged for that for 10 years. They still have not done it. And that in itself is costing us another $630,000 this year. It's cost us almost $20 million over the last 9 years. So, and those numbers are all on record at the State House. It was a gamble that the school committee took back in 2009, 2010, not to close Curtis Corner. So right now, if you give them 1%, and the $630,000 they're losing on the education funding formula, that's $1,190,000. So now they're at 2.2%. Youch. What I only heard once before, and all the time I've been at these meetings or on the council, only once before was the old divide and conquer card pulled out. Sports, art, and music will be cut next. Fear-mongering at its worst. And hopefully all of you will not fall for that. You cannot deliberately arouse public fear at three incredible programs, the importance to kids, when you are sitting on 60% capacity. Absolutely crazy. The council should be giving an outright condemnation of the school committee. Nothing but selfishness and greed. And you could end this by closing Curtis Corner this year. Superintendent Hicks had us saving $650,000 per year. And what you also don't realize, there'll be a few $100,000 of transportation savings by closing Curtis Corner. We have a ton of room to actually close both schools, Curtis Corner and Wakefield Elementary. But I've always been supportive, because of my business in real estate, of the localized elementary school. That's what all my parents and buyers of homes have wanted. But this keeping Curtis Corner open is just sheer malfeasance. Thank you very much.
You don't have to wait until the next person, or the next person sits down. Please just, come on up.
My name's Kristen Johnson. I live in Wakefield. I've written to you a couple times over the last several days. I do want to say, I think that there's a much larger issue at play here. I think that the town managers identified this really effectively, and it's something that is effectively also tainting part of our discussion, and that is that there's really been a divestment from the state for both municipal services and for education. And we're coming up on decades of this, where the state is expecting municipalities to make up the difference. And as a strong, affluent municipality relative to others in our state, the expected stopgap in some of those funding mechanisms is higher in terms of the expected town contribution than for others. And so that's just a reality. We're seeing it nationally, we're seeing it statewide, but there is a passing down to municipal level responsibility for both service provision and for education. And so in that environment, it's not surprising that we're hearing these overwhelming demands and needs from people coming up and talking about needs for first responders, needs for different types of services, and needs for the schools. I do want to contextualize that a bit. Again, I did say this in the email I sent, which I understand was certainly probably one of a drove that you've received lately. But what we have seen is consistently increases in the property tax transfer to municipal funding, and a real decrease if you look at inflation rates to schools in terms of property tax transfer funding on the part of the town. And so the expectation is, when the state changes the funding formula and passes this off to municipalities, is that municipalities are expected to make up that difference. Now, we've had a lot of debates and discussions about declining enrollment, but if you look at, from the last superintendent's report, the FTE to student ratio, they're about in line with what they were almost exactly in 2008 to the fiscal year 2018-19. We're where the schools were expected to be in terms of tightening that up. Yet the current property tax transfer is still functionally lower than the rate of inflation that we've seen since 2013. It makes sense that we are having these discussions and these difficulties, but it's important to recognize that some funding does need to happen for education as well. And I'm really asking you to look at the types of cuts that are imposed. These are not programmatic or luxurious cuts that are associated with the existing funding structures for schools. These are personnel cuts that fundamentally impact the quality of student experiences in ways that change the nature of our educational offerings and programming, really to the detriment of the town. We do have the tax capacity in this town to service all of our needs should we wish to do that at a relatively low cost. Our per capita levy as of 2017 in South Kingstown was lower than Narragansett, North Kingstown, and Charlestown. So we are not overtaxing. If you look at the current property valuations and reassessments, we're actually, right in line again or even lower. The town can afford to fund both, or at least create a 2.5 property tax transfer to schools. And I really hope that you might be willing to consider that, given that we have the ability to do it.
Hi, my name is Stephen Licht. I'm from Wakefield. I've actually had a stomachache all day thinking about this meeting because there are a lot of people in this room that I really respect. I respect their intelligence, respect their thought processes and their motivations, who disagree with me. And it's a difficult thing to get up and disagree with people that you respect. With that said, I do want to follow up with the last speaker and reiterate the point that in increasing the property tax transfer to the school, what you're doing is a percentage increase on last year's total funds, which means what you're really doing is filling in for inflation. Just keeping up with inflation is going to require this. It's going to require an increase in the property tax transfer every year. And again, not only if you look at the FTEs per the full-time employment per student in the schools, but also if you look at the spending per student adjusted for inflation, what you'll discover is over the last 10 years we've essentially kept constant. So your job is if you say 0%, is actually to say that you're cutting to the schools, and this is a reality because of inflation. A second point I'd like to make, which I think is very important, which is, and I guess this follows from what we've heard from some of the speakers before, is that you are not gifting money to the school committee. You are not giving money to JC. You're not giving money to people on the school committee you dislike. You're funding the schools so that we can educate the children here. It's not giving money to the school committee. So I think whenever you hear that rhetoric, I would like you to tune into your brain that someone is trying to appeal to maybe a personal feelings that you have about the other people who run this town, right? This is about funding the schools, not about giving money to the school committee. And finally, there's a point that's come up several times in public comment, both in this meeting and in previous meetings, sort of a fundamentally factually inaccurate point, which is that the schooling, the facilities that we have, or that the amount of money that the town council is giving to the school committee has an impact on the amount of funding, primary funding that we get from the state. And I would encourage you to look to primary sources and actually look to RIDE and actually look at the actual funding formula to understand that there are a number of variables that go into that. And in fact, you can boil them down to a single number, which is a per child number, which is the same for every child in every county, in every school, in every grade in this state, as well as the assessed total property value of the town compared to the assessed total property value within the state, the assessed median income, the median income in the town compared to the median income in the state, and the average number of students per day in the town, the district versus the total number in the state, and the percentage of students in poverty. If you look at the primary funding formula, again, I encourage you, if you're concerned about this, to look directly back at that, and you'll discover that those are the variables, and only those variables, that go into the amount of funding that the school gives us in the primary funding formula. And I guess those are my 3 points. That you're not giving money to the school committee. You need to keep up with inflation, and please make sure that you understand where the primary funding formula for the state actually is impacted by your decisions. Thank you.
All right. There's some new people entering the room. So we're doing public comment now before we all up here discuss the budget. If there's anybody who wants to come and give their opinion on what's in this budget or what's missing from it, please do that now.
You'll have to excuse me, public speaking's not my favorite thing to do. My name is Sarah Schofield. I'm a Perryville resident. I was born in South County Hospital in 1974. My entire family lives here. This is our home. We treasure South County for all that it is. I do hold a master's degree in special education and educational leadership, so I am speaking from experience of 20 years in teaching and a whole lot of schooling under my belt. I feel it's my civic and professional duty to share my passion and my knowledge with you today. In 1998, I got married in West Kingstown. We decided to go past the towers and move to Maine, where we had a baby, put her into school, and found the educational experience she was having there was nothing like our friends were having here in South Kingstown. I don't mean to brag, but I have a very special child. In Maine, they tried to skip her 2 grades due to her academic excellence. We agreed to a 1-year skip. In fact, the school was completely unable to meet her needs, even with a 1-year skip in academics. She soared beyond the top of her class. We made the decision to cut our ties in Maine and move home to South Kingstown, where we were hearing wonderful things about the education here. It is 5 years later. Our cost of living has more than doubled since we've moved home, and we're okay with that. Our child has an education in South Kingstown. They are meeting her needs. She still earns A's and B's. She comes home with a smile on her face. South Kingstown High School is a treasure. Now let me say this very clearly. I moved my highly accelerated student to South Kingstown knowing that my cost of living would double, and I do not regret that. The scare tactics that the taxes for schools are making people not move here is just wrong. The prices of the homes themselves are the problem. We continue to rent 5 years after moving home. I do not regret that. I'm going to get school teacher on y'all for a minute. According to Uri Brofenbrenner, a developmental psychologist who is known for his ecological systems theory of child development, a theory of educational psychology and studied human development over time, the model suggests that interactions between an individual and their environment, categorized into various systems, shape their development over time. If you notice, I'm going to give you a little handout because I am a teacher and that's what I do. There is a clear correlation and connection between the family unit and the community. And that little ring that ties the two together, that's your school committee. So that does make for excellence. If you want to have a family and community bond that is healthy, the school matters. If we fail at the school system level, where does that leave the family-community connection? If we decide to covet our tax dollars at the cost of our children, we will pay a far larger price. Seriously, we are cutting programs to our most needy as we review the state report card that indicates that our low socioeconomic and our minority students remain at risk, and we're cutting their programming. I do ask you to support our schools and vote yes on the school budget proposed by the school committee that was overwhelmingly voted into office. I pay close attention to the local, state, and federal politics. During the election this past November, I voted intentionally because the voters here are not idiots. I voted intentionally for candidates that spoke to their understanding of the importance of education and the ties to the community. I'm going to quote some of your words. Councilwoman Kelso, I literally voted for you on these words. I believe in taking care of our vulnerable citizens, protecting our environment, funding our schools, supporting our teachers, and ensuring equal rights. By cutting these programs to those very populations that the data is telling us need intervention is not honoring your campaign promise. Councilman McEntee, I am fully aware, these are your words, I am fully aware of how important it is for South Kingstown to deliver a high-quality education. If elected, I will make a priority to support excellence of education in South Kingstown. I have worked in schools for just short of 20 years, and sir, I can tell you funding schools does lead to excellence in education. Good teachers cost, quality curriculums cost, reliable transportation cost, intervention for our neediest students cost, technology cost. My taxes in Maine were $666 a year for a 3-acre property. As I mentioned, my cost of living has doubled here. I am okay with that because I have a child who is thriving at South Kingstown High School.
Sarah.
My time up?
Yes.
Oh, good, because really, just so you know, I could have a whole day on this.
You can come back up at the end.
No,
Just wanna give
I am
other
good.
people a chance.
I'm going to ask you to support the school budget. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Excuse me, Chris Hubbard from Wakefield, Rhode Island. Let's make this as simple as absolutely possible. Is there anybody in this room that thinks underfunding the school budget is a good idea? Nobody, right? Of course not. School committee has delved into every financial detail of their plan. They've looked at every dollar spent. They've looked at every penny spent. They are showing us very, very clearly how devastating even a 2 or 2.5% transfer is. Has anyone on town council delved into the budget as deeply as school committee has? If so, please tell me how we can do this for 2%. Or for the 1% that school committee was berated about not presenting last week. One of the people on the school committee sat in her car for half an hour and cried after the work session. She did not show the 1% balance sheet for some kind of theatrical antics. It's because she knew how devastating it would be to the school system. Unless somebody else can show me a budget that works at this 1% and 2% that is being talked about, I put my trust and my faith in school committee and believe that they're telling us what they need. Fund the school system properly. Let's get ahead of this problem. Give the hardworking, diligent, and yes, they are hardworking school committee the breathing room they need to get out ahead of this problem and formulate a plan to fix our school systems and the problems it has. Let's work with them, not fight them, to turn the school system back into the awesomeness that it used to be. Thank you.
Right. Any other folks want to speak to this budget?
Good evening, Bruce Whaler, West Kingston. First of all, I'd like to thank the town council and the town manager for your service to the citizens and taxpayers of South Kingstown. Very much appreciated. I can't imagine what you're going through and the difficult decisions that you must make. When I think of community, I just don't think about the school system. A community is a totality of everything that's happening in this town and the people in this town. The school system, the teachers, the students, the parents, our elderly, our businesses, they're all part of a vibrant community. So after being at many of these sessions, I have some observation I'd like to share. What I have to say is what I believe is becoming an increased concern with many South Kingstown taxpayers, particularly the fastest growing segment and number of voters in South Kingstown, which is our senior citizens. Also, the budget isn't about whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. It is about finding the proper balance between the education needs of our children and those of the rest of the community, including the elderly and the lower income people. At the present, I believe the school committee's budget is out of balance, particularly with significantly less students, with the enrollment trend continuing downward, and what I believe is the need for reduced infrastructure and possibly even reduced staffing to reflect those downward trends. Yearly increases in home property taxes, car taxes, multiple types of fees, and state taxes as well as federal are placing a suffocating burden on our citizens. When someone says that this town has the ability to pay, well, they're not really considering the individuals, whether or not the individuals have the ability to pay. Of course, we also face higher taxes resulting from the property reevaluations, and I've discussed here earlier, or actually a few weeks ago, my evaluation for a simple home in West Kingston has gone up 34%, and that still hasn't been resolved. And we're facing the reevaluations as well as we have to pay look at paying off the bond debt for school infrastructure of $75 million should that get approved by the voters. At the same time, our citizens are getting squeezed by paying more and more for housing, food, medical, dental, and on and on. While some of the tax and fee increases are outside the control of this town council, the property tax is clearly not. The property tax is one of the most regressive taxes and has the greatest impact on those least able to afford to pay it. Well, many of South Kingstown taxpayers, including the so-called middle class, the elderly and lower income residents, they're facing the financial equivalent of death by 1,000 cuts. And this expression, if you're not familiar with it, refers to a form of execution commonly used in China into the 1900s. We are being taxed and charged fees to the breaking point. Property owners are impacted directly. Renters will see monthly rent increases because of higher property taxes passed on by property owners. And both small businesses and consumers will suffer. Now, we've talked about trying to attract new families to this area. And many families may be interested in coming to South Kingstown because of the school system. But then they find they just can't afford it. Other parents may have rising income levels, possibly from both parents working professional jobs and having the financial ability to pay higher taxes. Everything is great and just rosy for them. But what about the rest of us? What happens when their kids graduate from high school, go to college, marry and have children of their own? Many of these same kids won't be able to afford living here, so they will leave for parts unknown. My college-educated children can't afford living here. Then there are the parents of these children who may now be retired with fixed income and who will have to make the difficult decision to stay and struggle financially or to move to a different and more affordable location. There's also been talk and suggestions about reducing the tax burden by making housing more affordable and thus increasing the tax base. But this is a difficult problem requiring a multifaceted, long-term approach. There's no quick fix to this. While there is no quick fix, getting property tax increases stabilized and under control is a positive step. I want to state clearly that I support our schools and children. 3 of my children went through this school system. Also, we have a fine school administration and dedicated, hard-working teachers and teachers' aides. But as I have mentioned before at other meetings, There needs to be a balance and sanity among the competing interests. With this said, I believe responsibility for the tension occurring during this budget cycle and the joint Town Council School Committee work sessions lies squarely at the feet of the majority of the school committee members who have failed to consider and balance these competing interests in our community. The school committee failed to respond to the Town Council's clear direction to provide specific impacts associated with a 1% property tax transfer increase. Instead, they charged forward with a 2.5% increase and only provided impacts sure to pull at parents' collective hearts and rally their forces.
All right, Mr. Whaley, or Bruce, thank you.
May I just close
If
then?
you're, yeah, right at the end, that's.
Thank you. I ask the Town Council to hold the school committee accountable now. I, as well as others in this community, are fearful that failure to hold them accountable this year will only result in the school committee demanding another property tax transfer increase next year and using this year as a baseline. I urge this Town Council to approve a school property tax transfer of no more than 1%. Thank you.
April Ewing from Wakefield. I wasn't even sure if I was going to bother to stand up and talk tonight, but if any of you had the fortune of going to see Escapades this past weekend, I'd like to mention a few things that stood out to me. That our students, our children, took their opportunity on our town stage to deliver a scathing commentary on the quality of our schools. And any adult who was in that room should have felt nothing but shame for the students to stand up there and talk about the building falling apart, heating not working, cooling not working, water fountains not working. It's insanity. Our students, our children, took their opportunity to call us out on our failures to deliver our promise to them. People have spoken tonight on numbers. I'm not going to give numbers. I'm not a numbers person. What I'm going to ask you to do is understand that we have a commitment to the children to make sure that their education is as good as ours. And I know some of you are lifelong South Kingstown residents, and I assure you that you did not feel about that building the way that these kids feel about it. Any child should feel pride. When they feel pride, they're going to work harder. They're also going to work harder to make our community stronger. These kids do not feel pride. They're ashamed of their building. They're ashamed to have to go in there. And for this town council and school committee to be infighting is ridiculous, because we should all be able to agree that our schools should be safe and clean. I'm disappointed in the adults in this town that I agree, we need roads, we need first responders, absolutely. But once again, I'm one of those people who wasn't born here, I moved here. And we chose South Kingstown for its schools when we moved in 16 years ago. So technically, my son's graduating in June. I should be considering one of those people that are aging out of the system, shouldn't care. But I do care, because I've been in those schools. I've volunteered in those schools. I see what's happening. And everybody wants to talk buzzwords, new things, innovation, all of that. That's not what our kids need. Our kids need right now safe buildings, quality teachers, and I think everybody should be able to agree on that. So once again, I hope that you will fund at the 2.5% level, because when you look at the cuts that have been suggested, they will be devastating in the classroom when we have structural issues that we have to fix. Thank you.
Roberta Mulholland, Matunic Schoolhouse Road. Thank you to the manager for the budget. And I'm here to support no more than a 1% transfer to the schools. I've come to a few of your meetings. It's hard for me to get here at night. I have my own night meetings. It's hard for everyone here probably to get here tonight. For close to 30 years, South Kingstown has planned and zoned to keep housing, specifically housing that would bring additional children to our school system from being built. In the process, the rights of many property owners were affected. In 1999, taxpayers didn't know this because the notice was in the paper and they didn't get a certified letter, wasn't required by law. But there are many that owned 2-acre lots that they thought someday they would subdivide, add a house for a child, or perhaps downsize, build a house, a smaller house for themselves, give a house to a child, or sell that extra lot for their retirement. That was taken away from them. For probably more than 30 years, South Kingstown has prioritized keeping land open and undeveloped. And that wasn't just because we like to look at open space. It was to keep people from moving here, because every piece of property that we protected was a large parcel that wasn't going to be developed. Over and over we were told, if every house brings an average of 2 children to our system, how much is that going to cost us? So time after time, and I know Mr. O'Neill has been up meeting after meeting saying over and over, the people of this town voted to buy open space. We gave our tax dollars to the land trust to buy open space. We took 3,000 acres off our tax rolls to preserve open space and to keep people from developing that property so that we would keep our children coming into this community down. So 30 years later, we're successful. 10 years ago, we were successful. Enrollments were declining. They've continued to decline. And now it's unbelievable to me that I hear some people talking, not you, about how do we get more children here. This is what we were told for decades was the goal. The goal was not to have so much money going into our school system. I'm not a lifelong resident. My parents moved here when I was 3. I went to South Kingstown schools. I did 2nd grade at Kingston Hill with Mrs. Cobble. September came. Lo and behold, I didn't go to Kingston Hill. I went to South Road School, where I didn't listen to the instructions and could barely find my way to my 3rd grade. We'd make changes. Children make changes. The declining enrollment has not been addressed. South Road closed. We are not getting the money from the state. It's clear they've told us, and we knew years ago this was going to happen because we have too much facility for the number of children. Trying to say that we have to bring people here isn't dealing with what's happening right now. There are many people marginalized in this town. Frankly, it feels that this town has become somewhat elitist, somewhat snobby in our zoning. You know who can afford to live in the rural areas? Only people of pretty good means. If you didn't own a place in the rural areas in the 70s or before that, you're probably not going to be able to have a place in the rural areas. We just took 40 acres off the tax rolls last year when the Boy Scouts had that piece. Those 40 acres could have been homes for people with children. This council and 30 years of councils before you have made the decision not to do that. You've made the decision, going along with the voters, to keep development out of South Kingstown. At this point, it's getting a little ugly and painful to watch people in this town fighting with each other, calling names. If I support a 1% tax increase, that does not mean I don't support public education. I had a public education, had a great public education in this town. I went to our state university. But the people who aren't here tonight, that live on Social Security, it's really a little concerning to hear someone say, or more than one person say, that Social Security recipients got a 2.8% raise this year and they can afford it. They don't count the years that they got 0.3%, or understand, perhaps, I hope it's just that they don't understand, that people live on that. That's what they're living on in retirement. That's all they have. To hear people talk about,
Roberta.
and I've heard this said, that if you can't afford to live here, move. That should not be said in our town. Our town used to be welcoming. It's not. My taxes haven't increased appreciably for the last blank years. I've heard it and I've seen it written, without regard for the fact that your idea of appreciably is different than mine. So I would like to ask you to speak for the people who are marginalized, the people who don't have a large group fighting for, whether it's Wakefield Elementary or everything the teachers want. Please continue to speak for all of the people in South Kingstown and pass with the 1% PTT. Thank you.
All right, has everybody said everything they want to say?
Chris Roman, Wakefield. I sent an email this afternoon, so this will be a quick recap in case you didn't read it. My thoughts were just that the town for the last 2 years has been through sort of a rough patch with the whole facilities planning. I think it was a good exercise, but the way the whole process went through, a lot of oxygen got taken out of the room and for productive thought for bigger high school programs based on the elementary school fight. Right, so we had an opportunity to think big, and it kind of got squandered a lot, I think, for some of the elementary school fight. And I think we're sort of at the same scenario here, where looking forward, 2 years from now, we're going to be in a new funding formula regime. We're going to have a new facilities outlook for the school, depending on the uncertainty of the RIDE application. There's a lot of things that could be different 2 years from now, structurally in the schools in terms of facilities and everything. And hobbling the school budget now for the sake of 1 year worth of savings, where we're going to lose staffing, we're going to upend a lot of programs, seems to be a little short-sighted if we want to think about what are the longer-term planning things we could be doing. And so I would say it may be a bitter pill to swallow this year if you're ideologically, philosophically, religiously opposed to property tax transfers, but if we can look forward and say, where are we going to be in 2 years, 5 years, I would say, let's get through this moment and look at some more structural changes we can make to the budgeting process as a whole, so we don't find ourselves doing this every year. Right? Are there things we can do to look for 2 year, 3 year, 4 year? I don't know all the rules and the bylaws of budgets and the councils on this stuff, but the video I watched from the other night, the town manager did talk about there's a gap period coming up where there's going to be some time between now and April where budget gets refined, but if we can think bigger about how we do this just from the get-go next year and not constantly find ourselves in this battle, which I think just creates a lot of ill will, takes the oxygen out of the room, because we do have a tremendous opportunity. If we were successful with the RIDE application, we could be putting things we're really proud of into the high school. But if we're fighting and pitting each other against small things here every year, it's really counterproductive to our bigger picture. All we're doing is creating uncertainty in the school programming in South Kingstown, which could only have negative pressure on enrollment and people wanting to live here. So my message is maybe deal with it this year and look at bigger structural changes in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, Jocelyn Leska. I just have a couple of small points. The first is, when I looked at the agenda, there wasn't anything about public comment. So it's difficult to be prepared appropriately, which I certainly am not, if you don't know that there's going to be public comment allowed. So just in the spirit of transparency, it would be important to include that in upcoming agendas so that those of us who like to appear somewhat glued together, which isn't always my case, but would like to be in that state, it would be helpful. I'm not going to repeat all of the comments that have been made here. I just want to clarify a couple of points. The first is when the school committee was asked by the town council to bring forth what a 1% increase in funding would look like, they were not told not to bring forward anything else. They were free to present all of the scenarios from a 1% increase to a 2.5% increase. And they refused to present any scenario, from what I could see, except for threats, unfounded threats of cuts. I want to remind this town council, you're not cutting a budget. You're considering what level of increase in funding you're going to provide. And currently, the concept that's on the table is 1% to 2.5. So it's not a cut, it's an increase. And the final comment, which no one has addressed, is in 1 year, you and the school committee are going to be negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract with MIRI. This is an SK versus MIRI moment. And if you think it's not, boy, oh boy, you're making a big mistake. So thank you, and again, I so much appreciate your time and the thought and consideration that each of you put into your service for the town. Good night.
Thank you.
Mark Levitt, Wakefield. I moved here 42 years ago without children. And then 5 years ago I woke up and there were 2 in the bed. So for 37 years I supported the school system. I supported all that the school system offered, all the support that the school system gave to my friends' children, to the community's children. And now at a moment when I'm going to put my kids in the kindergarten, somehow, for some reason, we're going to succumb to the ways in which funding works in this nation, which is totally inequitable, where towns have to somehow subsidize, more than subsidize, pay for the education of our children. It presents us with this kind of problem, which pits us against one another. In a situation where a government should be funding the possibilities for the future of every person in the nation for its own good. But this collective goodness needs to be also in this town at this point. Because these cuts not only mean different environment for my children than those children that I help subsidize going through the system, those cuts will cut deeper with those who have less resources to go elsewhere. Every cut that has anything to do with a child's education or the facilities can be circumvented if you have the money. You can take kids to different activities. You can bring them to different camps. You can do all kinds of activities. This cut will cut deeper in those who can least afford it. It's certainly a moral issue, but it's also a practical issue. Because once we turn our back to education equity, we're turning our back to the community and the health of the community that my children will participate in, that your children and grandchildren will participate in, and that we all participate in. This issue of going down to bare bones of 1% belies anybody's interest in education equity. We're talking small amounts of money, and I don't mean to say that that doesn't actually mean something to people. But we're talking about small bits of money, and we're enacting this on a council, on a school committee that's just getting its legs. To be able to cut this, deny the importance of equity in education, to not be able to recognize that the school committee is getting its footing, to do this is only done, in my opinion, as a form of vengeance, a form of anger coming out and manifesting in a tax decrease. To me, the children don't deserve to be in the center of what is actually a confrontation between two, quote, factions that shouldn't be even fighting for this one way or another in the first place. But we're being now seduced into this kind of argument, which is pulling the town apart, increasing equity in our community, inequity in our community, and denying the children who are entering the school and in the school the same kind of quality education that I helped fund all these years. So while I'm not asking you for 4% or 5%, I'm asking you to go with this school committee, begin a process of reunification with this school committee. Go with the 2.5%. Work with them for the year constantly on how to work on this situation so that everybody benefits from the intelligence and quality of life here. Don't make it a cut to what we believe is important here. Please, 2.5% will not hurt. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Martha Bedigian, and I sent you all letters, and if you don't mind, I just want to take a minute to recap some of the highlights. It's my understanding that the difference between the 1% and the 2.5% amounts to about $7 a month for the average house in South Kingstown. Is that correct? That is not correct?
I would say no. For my calculations, the difference between the 3.31% and a 4% increase, which would be necessitated by a 2.5% increase to the schools, would be about $3.10 a month.
So less than I thought?
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about a difference of $3.10 a month. So I'm just a little confused as to why this argument is so vehement on both sides. I pay more for coffee every 6 months, you know? It's like inflation is a fact. But I'd like to also say that this battle is really, I think, to be fought at the state level. I think it's been $500,000 a year for 8 years that I've watched the cuts and lived the cuts. My life is very different in the schools, and the people around me work very differently. I mean, we always worked hard, but we're working really hard now to make up for what's been taken away. I believe that we should be working together to refocus our efforts on the transportation issues that we have at the state level. Can we advocate for South Kingstown? As Chris Roman pointed out, we have a new regime coming in and a new opportunity there. I also want to say that I have faith in this new school committee and in their good intentions. They've started a couple of months ago, but I've heard numerous times that their intention is to perhaps build the budget from the ground up. We've got some people that are in business on that committee, and that was their desire. They need a little time to do that. Right now they're being faced with a crisis, and I think they could use your help. For a difference of $3 per household in South Kingstown, I'm not sure why it's such an argument, really. But I do believe that it's not their intent to come every year for that money. So, you know, I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. I thank you for your time.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Scott, and I've lived in this town since about 1986 or so. And my 2 children went through the public school system here, and I think got a reasonable education. My observation of the school system in the time that I've been here is that in the early to mid-'80s, we had an exceptional school system. It was often rated up there with Barrington and East Greenwich. We were, you know, like the top tier of public education in the state. And that's been slipping. We've been riding on the coattails. I felt that was the way when my children were in school here. that there was great programming, but there was like riding the coattail syndrome going on, that we weren't really stepping up to the plate to keep us at as high, a level and to be as good a school as we see in these other high-performing schools. And I definitely don't think tests are, the end-all, but it certainly is one measure of how well school systems are doing. And South Kingstown, doesn't place among the very top schools. We're in the upper, but we're not in the top. And the other observation that I have is that the physical plants they're like getting to a point, the high school in particular, where it's kind of embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be walking down a hallway where there's buckets. It's embarrassing to walk into a gym that's like a 1950s or 60s era gym. I think we have to invest in our education and in our school systems here. And I think it's incredibly important for our school children and for the next round of town councilors who will sit, where you are in 20 years, 10 years. I think it's also really important to be able to attract businesses to this town. If we want top tier, or, just to be growing our economic base with high paying jobs, what are those companies looking for? They're looking for good schools, among other assets, but schools are crucial. I think it is just being completely foolish, particularly for the monetary difference that we're talking about, to be making significant cuts in the programming at these schools. I think it's just stupid. And I'll leave it there.
Anybody else?
Doral Beasley, I live in Kingston. Okay, so you guys are going to kick the can down the road for another year. That's what you're about to do if you go with this proposed budget as it's written. And you will be abrogating your fiduciary responsibility. You'll have handed it over to the school committee. It's not just this school committee, it's every school committee that's been in existence in this town for probably the last 20 years. They're there for one reason only. They're there to keep as many people who work either in the NEA, RI, or the Council 94 employed, period. Okay, and the cuts, here's the list of cuts, right? So you got, on the top, you got all the stuff we don't want to lose, the carpets, the bridge program, the cares, the smiles, the late buses, all that stuff, you want to keep all that stuff. $715,000. Okay, and I know maybe somebody's going to come up after me and go, oh, you're comparing this to Barrington again, but let me start with this one. When the YCAS results came out and published in the Providence Journal, it said this: not a single district in Rhode Island, not one, was equal to the Seekonk School District, which is in the bottom quarter, I think, if I'm correct, of Massachusetts in their MCAS test. Now, Barrington has an 8.44 to 1 student to employee ratio. Our ratio is 6.14. So what who cares, right? 8.44, 6.14, what's that? You know what that is? It's 132 people. If we had their 8.44 ratio here in this town, we'd have 132 less people working in our district. Now, this slide that the superintendent shows all the time
the one that shows, since she's arrived, that the drop in enrollment is equal to the drop in employment. It's actually incredibly misleading slide. Because what you don't see here, what I added on the bottom of this slide, are the ratios employed to students. The year before she came, the ratio was 6.12. 10 years later, it's 6.13. Now, mid-decade, the ratio got all the way up to 6.75. So in 2014 to 2015 school year, the ratio was 6.75. But now we've gone back to 6.14. That's equal to over 50 people additional, 50 additional people working in our district for that declining enrollment. So this slide is basically garbage, okay? If this is what I think, and I called the town clerk's office today. This is what I think needs to happen. We cannot kick this can down the road again this year. We've got a contract negotiations come up next year. We've got too many people working in our district. I'm still waiting for any of you, when you sit across at the table from the school committee and the superintendent's over there, ask her, why do we have 132 more people than Barrington? When are you going to ask the question? And stop waffling. The majority of you, when you make your statements just before your votes, you waffle, you equivocate. You start out by going, oh yeah, we got to hold the line, or we should wait for the demographic report before we send the stage 2 application to RIDE. But, well, anyway, we're going to vote to send it out on Friday. Or like last Wednesday, when one of you started out really strong, and I said, oh man, that person's going to say you're going to hold on 1%, and then they waffled back up to like double that. We don't want wafflers, okay? Don't equivocate.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley.
Oh, I was saying, here's what I'm going to say. This is what I think you should do. I think you should tell the town clerk tonight to advertise for another meeting on Thursday night and get the school committee back here and put their feet to the fire. You have time. You have tomorrow morning, you'll have a 48-hour window to publish that meeting. You need to get them back in here and then make them start to drop this ratio this year, not next year, because every dollar that doesn't come back out of that thing this year is a dollar that's not going to be able to be put in your schools.
Good evening, Taylor Rollis from West Kingston. This is based on what I heard last week when the school committee did present. I think that the cuts to the programs that are going to be serving the kids and are a part of the schools as we know them now, those cuts at the 2.5% level were pretty significant. There were special educators being lost, there were counselors, and as my understanding is, counselors have a huge student to counselor ratio that is already way overdone, way too large. Foreign language, other programs that are really valuable in this community that help make this community special and decent. I think as someone said, that education is a way of helping to make our community more equitable. And, we want to keep investing in that. And I think the issues that some of the people have brought up, like about housing and the affordability, very, very important points, but to me, they're separate from serving our children in the best way that we can now. And then we also need, on a parallel track, to be dealing with the questions of, it's a housing affordability, and how do we make our community continue to be a diverse one that we all want to live in and be a part of. But I would say, please keep the cuts, keep this at that 2.5%. And as was pointed out, some of the earlier miscalculations on the budget, there is that very minor difference in terms of like the $3 per household per month. So please, so keep it at the 2.5. I don't have any kids. My kids already dealt with the South Kingstown school system, for better or for worse, in some cases well, in some cases not so well. But I think having good schools is something that all people in the community can be proud of. And these, this is our future, and, only through putting our support into education can we really have a really good community going forward.
Hi, Stacy Bozzioni, Wakefield. So we've heard some comparisons tonight about if we fund the schools, then maybe we won't have enough money. We'll be taking money from the municipal side, and maybe emergency services would be affected. And I just wanted to say that 19 years ago, when I was a young mother, I had a baby who had a seizure, and we called 911, and they had to drop a paramedic at my door and keep going because there was actually a murder in Peacedale that night, and they couldn't bring me an ambulance. I had to wait for one to come from Narragansett. So this is a problem that we've been facing a long time as a community, and I don't think that we should have to choose. We shouldn't have one or the other. We should be able to have both. And I think from what we've heard tonight, we can afford to have both good schools and a safe community, and we deserve it. I ask you to support the school with the 2.5%. Thank you.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle. So I wasn't here last week, as I told you I wouldn't be, because I was in Florida. But I told you I wasn't going to be thinking about you, but I was. I couldn't get you out of my mind. Oh. Hey, you guys have a hard job. You know where a lot of my thoughts are. I don't have a quarrel with you wrestling with it, but I'm hoping you wrestle and get to a place that I really strongly feel the vast majority of South Kingstown residents want you to be at. So is it true that it's $3 a month, the difference between the 1% and 2.5%?
That's the difference between
the average,
2.3, the recommended budget.
Yeah.
The preliminary budget as you see it on the agenda. It's out there. And a 4% increase is $3.10 a month.
Okay.
For the average household.
Right, yeah, okay. So, I kind of agree with the speakers. It does kind of make it an easy choice from that standpoint, but I know you hear from some agitated people from the other side, so that's where your wrestling comes in. But I just want to bring out, for all the years I've been going to these meetings, 15 years plus now, always talking about the affordability of South Kingstown in the context of taxes. And I brought this up, but it really is about the cost of housing, and that illuminates the point. So we're talking about the average homeowner, $3 a month, okay? Whereas South Kingstown, the cost of your average or your median house is about $100,000 more than your average or median house in Rhode Island. And so depending on what the interest rates are, that's $100,000, the $100,000 finance per month is anywhere between $400, $500. If the rates go up, it'll become more than that per month. And so the people, it seems disingenuous to me, and maybe they just haven't thought about it, But it seems disingenuous to me when they come forward with that, putting their hands out for the poor, And it's like, well, but you're not worried, I never hear you talk about bringing the cost of housing down. That's hundreds of dollars a month. That's where this town is becoming more affluent, and it was remarked kind of being a bit more elitist. And I see it. I don't think anybody that lives here doesn't see it or doesn't feel that on one level or another. And it's still a great community. But it certainly, and I don't want to motivate you guys to have it keep going like that. But if it keeps going on the track that we're going, I'm not going to be able to put up with it. It's tough. And so people that are talking about keeping it affordable, it's not the taxes. It is the cost of housing. And so just I really want you to kind of think about, when you're hearing the advocacy from people, what's the sincerity level with that? And just on the zoning piece, and the rules about keeping the families out and like that. I mean, that basically, it sounds harsh to say it in that way, but we were on a trajectory of going from 3,000 students up to over 4,000 students over a period of 10 years or whatever. I mean, you can look it up. They wanted to curb it. They saw it happening, and they wanted to curb it. And it has been curbed. And they really should have eased off. I think people should have eased off on that before we got to this point. But it wasn't to say, that I don't know what student population people want. Do they want to get down to 2,000, 1,500? Do we want to be like Jamestown, where it's just, mostly older folks and the families have been squeezed out and there's so little bit of a school population? So I hope you kind of think about it in that context too, that the effort to curb the school population has been successful. It probably has gone a little further than it needed, but I don't think people, by and large, really want this to become a community, just like a coastal community, only affluent, second homeowners, snowbirds. And God bless them. I'm happy they're here. They do help. They add to the community. But it's just keeping that balance. Thank you.
Jim has already spoken.
Good evening. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I jotted some things down as I was sitting here. My name is Jess Jeremiah. I am a South Kingstown resident. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the town council for their work and for the school committee, all the public officials here tonight who are working on our behalf. I appreciate that quite a bit. From what I have seen, and I'm one that over especially the past couple months, I've had some situations where I haven't been able to be here in person, but I have been watching diligently all the live stream and the pre-recorded school committee and town council. So just to be aware, I think it's important to be aware that there are people in this room and there are also more people out exposed to what's happening who are watching from home. From my perspective and everything I've seen and watched and read, and the people I've spoken to on school committee and campaigning and all of these things, school committee and town council are two separate jobs. And from what I see, the school committee's job is to serve the students and serve the schools to make sure that the education is provided that is needed. They have done their job looking very, very carefully at the budget. They may not have come down to the percentage point that you wanted, but I have seen really deep analysis, further than I've seen over the past year's budgets, on what services are being provided, what can we cut, what can we do, because make no mistake about it, a 1% property tax transfer would be a cut to the schools. We have contracts that have gone up, we have inflation, we have services that need to be met, and 1% would not cover what we had last year. So 1% property tax transfer is a cut to the schools. So if that is all that they are granted, that is what they are left with. In fact, at 2.5%, they are still looking at cuts that they're making. We're also in a time where our students, and I believe it was mentioned by Brian maybe in the last meeting, where we have students who are going straight from 8th grade to other schools at a faster rate. Our commissioner, who's actually exiting now, had made a rule where you can just go to whatever schools if they have another pathway or another career and technical school plan developed. That was not the case years ago. We had specific schools that were allowed to develop pathways, and now that we have it open more, we're losing kids at a higher rate. I work at Charahoe schools, and at my school, all of the career and technical programs are full and have wait lists for next year. And I don't know the exact numbers, I'd love to know them, but many of those students already, before that rule, were South Kingstown schools leaving, and that costs us. So if we are underfunding the schools and we are undermining the quality that the schools can provide, make no mistake that the kids will flee to the other schools, whether it be the other public schools that have career and technical programs or private institutions. And with the public schools that have other programs, like if they come to Charahoe, the money follows them. So then we're losing even more money. So, it's not always as black and white and as easy as saying, cut it to this percent and that's the total cost. We need to invest in our schools, and investing in our schools will pay back. I also urge you as a town council, since I believe the school committee has done their job, and I have heard conversations that have been creative at your table as well in terms of affordable housing, zoning, many ways to figure out what long-term plans there can be to kind of change the dynamics. We've heard a little bit about the past mistakes that have led us here. So as I rely on the school committee to both advocate for a budget that meets the needs for students, but while being fiscally responsible, I would also look to town council for creative solutions that can work for our whole community, so we're not in this mess year and year and year again. This is not a quick fix. Going for a 1% tax transfer, property tax transfer, will not solve this big overall problem. And just to give you a little bit of a story from my perspective of moving here and not a lifelong resident, I work in education, and I subbed in South Kingstown amongst many other districts. And I found the teaching and learning here to be remarkable. I was very impressed with the schools. I wanted to live here for the schools, and I talked to my peers, and many of them feel that way. Other peers moved to different districts with more affordable housing, and they live in bigger houses, and their children attend those districts. That's fine. That's the choice that they made. I decided to live in a district that I am reconfirmed tonight, actually, that really, truly believes that education is a priority. I really hope you listen to the people who spoke tonight, because the majority of them seem to want to invest in education. And when you hear about the difference in cost, it really kind of does put that into perspective. I do still believe that our schools are good, and we can't really compare it to places like Barrington and things like that. The demographics are different. And when we bring up test scores, we have to really be putting things in perspective. This year was the first time we used computer-based testing at the elementary schools. Our school students at elementary do not get a lot of exposure to the computer, the technology at the elementary level, which is fine. That's a priority. But when the first year of students taking tests on that, on the computers, without that exposure, you always see a drop. Additionally, the way that RIDE has scored schools is they looked at several factors, and they scored each factor individually, things like test scores, attendance, and the like. And the way that you got your score was whichever category you scored the lowest in, that's the score you got. So you could have gotten the highest score in every category except one, and you got a low score, and that's how you were scored. So I think there are a lot of splashy headlines about our schools underperforming, and I don't think it matches what we're seeing in the classrooms. It certainly doesn't match what my kids are bringing home as students, and the work that we're seeing done by teaching in this district. 2.5% I think is fair, and I think that we can afford it, and I urge you to listen to the public and please go for the 2.5% property tax transfer.
So I'm looking for people who haven't spoken before to come and speak. I think we're going to just have one chance to speak tonight. I'm going to say that I've learned my lesson. So please continue.
Hi, Laura Roebuck. I actually was watching from home, and I wasn't speeding, but I did come over from Snug Harbor. And I'm actually, really honored to be a part of this community. I go to a lot of school committee meetings. I have young children, and I have to admit, town council isn't necessarily on my list of meetings to attend. But town council members have come to school committee meetings, and school committee members come to town council meetings. And I think that we do have magic in this community that's being suppressed. I finally am able to say Mr. Zarnaski's name, I'm getting there, as a new town manager. And there are a lot of new faces, but we all have the same common chord. And I think that's what makes South Kingstown special. We have a marketing committee now for our school district. We choose SK. I'm not from South Kingstown. My in-laws are. And I feel that a plan is needed on all accounts. And I feel that we have the ingenuity in this town to make that plan. We need to put our private agendas aside. I'm not speaking for you. I'm speaking as a community. I think that the older people in the community that went to South Kingstown High School, it's the same high school. So think about your high school 50 years, and it's the same high school. I think that's what the message we're trying to give. It's got nothing to do with the number of iPads. It's got nothing to do with the one-on-one computers. It's got to do with the walls and the floors. And we're working on it. And I think that with that CARES program that we have, if people from the district can come into the schools, we need you. We want your history. We want your perspective. Our children thrive on that. Equally, those kids will go to the beach cleanups. They will participate in the town stuff. That's what makes our town special. So social media, I feel like, is ruining us. I think we all just need to put on our rubber gloves, put on our boots, and we have a building committee. The town manager sits on. Many of you sit on. School committee members, community members. We can agree to disagree, and we can compromise. I'm not going to speak on the numbers. I am a numbers person, but I think what's been said tonight speaks for itself. And when we go home and we put our head on the pillow, we're still thinking. And that's what makes us special. We want what's best for this community, for everyone. And the fact that we have multi-generational people still coming to the microphone to speak, I think regardless of the percentage, their kids will be up here. Our babies that aren't even born yet will be at this microphone speaking to the next generation on how to make South Kingstown as special as it was 100 years ago. The photos show it in 100 years. So thank you for your service. Thank everyone for showing up tonight. Let's keep it going. Let's not make it a budget meeting. Let's show up at these meetings and brainstorm and collaborate, because we do have what it takes, the ingenuity and cutting edge. So thank you.
All right, if I don't see any other public comment, let us discuss the budget. No timer for you guys even. So, Do you want to give any prefatory remarks, Rob?
Mr. President, a couple of things that I would like to just do, if I can pull this up. I'd like to just point out where we are in the process. We have had a request for a schedule change made by the school committee that noted that our is it the final adoption or no? It's the public hearings are scheduled for the 15th and 16th, which is school vacation week. They asked that we consider moving the schedule so that it doesn't interfere or doesn't conflict with the vacation week. We've looked at this, and we really don't have anywhere in the schedule that we could move. We're constrained by the charter, which requires that we have the final adoption on the 29th, by the date that we've got there. We really can't move forward from the 15th and 16th to the 10th and the 11th because we have to, once this preliminary budget is adopted tonight, send it off to the state. The state reviews and approves the preliminary budget. That process can take, what do you think?
5 days.
And in order to get to the 10th and the 11th, we'd be 6 days. We're looking for an absolutely perfect review by the state. If anything were to happen, we're gonna bump into that. So it's tight. We could move it to the 10th and the 11th, but if the state were to...
No, we can't move it to the 10th and 11th because we have to have the notice in the paper 10 days prior to the public hearing. So we have to get it into the paper on Monday. What date, Dale?
Friday,
It's going to be in the paper for the 27th.
We have to have the ad ready by the 2nd.
So we can't move it any earlier, and we need to have the budget adopted by the charter by May 1st.
There's really just, it's this way, it's been this way for a long time because you're bound by the charter and the process that the state imposes, or the state requires anyway. So, we looked, we tried going forward, we tried going backward. It just doesn't, there's just not enough slack in the system to make it work comfortably. There is this possibility of moving it forward, and if the state, goes one day longer than we anticipate, we're not going to get there.
All right. Any
the other thing that I'd like to point out, and I'm somewhat hesitant to point it out, and I'm going to let Trish do some explaining here. These things shift all the time. We've got numbers that are modified constantly, things that are changing as we go through the process. I will point out that this is preliminary budget adoption. It is going to change again by the time we get to final adoption. But these are the implications, our best calculations at this point, given the information that we've got tonight. These are the implications of a 1%, that's the first column, a 1.5%, a 2%, and a 2.5% increase in the property tax transfer. Given tonight's numbers, given tonight's calculations, a 2% is roughly achievable remaining within the state cap if we make no other changes to the budget. A 2.5 is simply not possible, and beyond that, it's, something's got to come out just to get to 2. It's not a huge number, but it's a number that we're going to have to come out just to get to 2. Trish, any?
I just want to say I ran a quick calculation. At 1.9% to the school department, the tax levy increases 3.98%.
So that sort of caps us out at 1.9, which is actually pretty consistent with where we've been. The numbers do change and assumptions change a little bit, but it's pretty consistent with where we've been through the budget process to date, which is part of the reason why we got caught up the other last Wednesday night, because those numbers looked, at least in the early years, to be about right. We went wrong with a formula being carried in a cell. But this is about right. This is about where we expect to be.
And if we withdrew, instead of using property tax to pay for the $500,000 in debt service.
So the problem with not putting the $5,000, the $500,000, I want to understand your question correctly. You're not suggesting that we not put money aside for property or for debt service related to the bonding project that we anticipate around school improvement.
Right.
You're anticipating we fund it with some other revenue source, such as
undesignated
fund. So this year's budget, the proposed budget, is built around the assumption that we're not going to contribute to the undesignated fund balance, which is the first time in a long time that hasn't happened. So we're not taking from the undesignated fund balance, but we're not contributing to it.
Well, yeah, we're using $600,000 of fund balance to offset our property tax need.
So you're going deeper is the answer.
I understand. I was just wondering what the implications are.
That would be the implication. You're reducing the ability of the community to demonstrate its financial strength to the bond market as you're contemplating going to the bond market for a project, a large project.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the difference in the property tax.
Oh, $500,000 reduction in property tax would be, what do you got? I'm going to run the number. That's not it here.
So if you don't use, if you don't appropriate the $500,000 and you keep the debt service level funded at $1.1 million, at 2.5%, the tax levy is 3.74. But I caution you, if you remember when we went back to the capital budget, those outer years when you hit 2024 and 2025, you are going to be looking for $900 to $1.3 million in those outer years. So if you don't start funding that project now, if it moves forward, you're going to be another $500,000 in the hole, and I don't know how you're going to be able to raise it based on what we have right now.
Yeah, I just am trying to provide a scenario where we can give 2.5%, not cut the municipal budget, still do everything we're wanting to do, just so people know out there in the world.
Yeah, I would be, we keep a level of undesignated fund balance so that we have a good bond rating. We're looking at the potential for some pretty serious borrowing coming up. And believe me, if we don't need $500,000 in the undesignated fund, I think we should give it back where it came from, which is to the taxpayer, frankly. But I think we need it. I think we need to keep that good bond rating.
I mean, I feel, do we want to focus on the overall budget first, talk about human service agencies? We have a bunch to get through.
Let's pull the scab off. Let's deal with the school budget, and that's my vote. That's my opinion.
Mr. President, if it's helpful, I do have a comparison of the 1% and the 2.5% based on the superintendent's preliminary proposed budget, which was at 1%. So if that's helpful, you can see where the difference is between a 2.5 and a 1 as crafted by the school superintendent.
Sure.
So most of the differences, obviously, are in staffing. The superintendent's budget was $120,000 at 1% lighter than the school committee's budget with regard to teachers and teachers' salaries. Nearly $200,000, $191,975,000 lighter on guidance counselors. Therapists, nurses, social workers was $49,654 lighter. The school committee actually made a reduction greater than the superintendent's with regard to dean of students and with regard to their own stipends. They also made a reduction that was greater than the superintendent's 1% proposed with regard to salaries on curriculum folks, and somebody from the school committee would have to explain to you what that means. The assistant principal line item was lighter by $111,000 on the 1% budget. The teacher's aid is $166,000 lighter on the 1% versus the 2.5%. Custodial staff is $70,000 lighter on the 1% than it is with regard to the 2%. $9,000 would be, or $9,642 would be added on the school committee's budget as opposed to zeroing out of the after-school program in the superintendent's 1%. And the summer pay is lighter on the superintendent's 1% proposed as opposed to the 2.5% adopted by the school committee. Those are the major changes. There are some materials supply changes. The school committee actually reduced supplies by $30,000 beyond what the superintendent had proposed. But generally, it's personnel.
All right, thank you. So, comments up here at the table?
I voted to pull the scab, so I'll go first, I guess. But not. Just to get the discussion going, I guess. So I view this as a perennial problem. It's my 5th budget, and I think we're down about 400 students. So it's not just a matter of, to me, it's not just a matter of funding and teacher-student ratios. 400 students is a big number. We've also seen an increase in the property tax transfer every year, and as I stated last week, the starting point for next year will be wherever we land tonight. So you can be sure that we'll be having this discussion again. It's sort of a perennial problem. There is a compounding effect. When you say it's only this much money, do it over 8 or 10 or 12 years, and there's a compounding effect to a $10 or $20 or $50 a month additional expense. My personal opinion is that the funding at the current level, before this, whatever we decide on this budget, is over $20,000 per student. My feeling is that that is adequate funding to provide a quality education and to maintain facilities. And my opinion also is that we have not been maintaining facilities. So the funding is going primarily to the educational component and in salaries and administration and those kinds of things. And so that's where I'll start the discussion.
So first off, I'd like to say that it is our role as the town council to scrutinize the school committee's budget. We're talking about a $55 million appropriation from the council to the school committee. So I think for those of you who disagree with that, I think that's bad business. That's bad town business. So I think you as voters and residents of SK should expect that in us to scrutinize the school budgets, the school committee's budget. I would also like to say that I think it's in agreement of all five of us up here that education is the priority in SK. It's the best service that we offer here. I was a graduate of the high school in 2011, and I've seen the quality there firsthand, and it's done great things for me. I went on to college. I went on to get a master's degree, and since college I've been working in a firm, and I've had great growth ever since. So I do support education. It is a priority for me, and I do support excellence in education. As I stated at the work session, I did have a little displeasure that the school committee has disregarded our request at putting together a budget with a 1% property tax transfer increase. I will maintain that the max I had set at that meeting was that the max that I would give or I would stand behind is a 2% increase. I maintain that, and I think it's up to the school committee to figure out how to justify the differences between the 2.5 and the 2% to make sure that we don't sacrifice quality in education. I think that is sufficient for them. They should be able to adequately fund the schools. This is a balancing act. We need to look out for all the residents and all parties here in SK. So that's where I stand.
Yeah. So I'd like to just begin by making a public apology for my tone last week. I know some people took offense, and I can't say that I blame you. I will tell you that the passion comes from wanting the best for this town and wanting everyone to be their best. So I will apologize for my tone, but not my passion. Most of you know that our hands are tied by Senate 3050, which put a cap on property taxes at 4%. That's the most we can raise in 1 year. So I think our job as a council is to find the balance. We know we're going to have or we expect, I guess, to have an increase, except for Joe, in property taxes on an annual basis. It's my job to find that balance. So the school committee needs some, and the municipal side needs some. That's our job as the council, is to find that balance. Where the school committee spends their money is the school committee's business. So we can't go in and say, you've got too many of this and you should not have that. We can only say, in good conscience, we can only ask the taxpayers for this many dollars. And that's where my struggle is. What can I ask? Excuse me. So I can ask a lot from the people in my neighborhood and not so much from the people in the next neighborhood. I am a supporter of education. I am a supporter of the underprivileged taxpayer. I always will be. I will probably be very much in support of what the town manager has just proposed.
We've been here before, and I don't think any of us want to be here in this situation. We definitely don't want animosity between two governing bodies in our town. But I'll just give you a quick example. We talked about, okay, maybe we could get rid of the arborist truck that we were going to purchase and hiring a full-time arborist. But at the same time, that's really important for us to have because of the fact that we are living in an aging forest. I don't think any of us don't want to protect our way of life, making sure that we have electricity. And the reason why I bring up the arborist, that's someone that's sole job is to go around, identify trees that need to be addressed so that they don't cause issues for power outages like they did in the past. So again, that's just one quick example. I do agree with everyone up here that we all support education. I know that in the past we talked about being more efficient in the way we spent our money because if you waste $1, that's one child or a teacher that's not getting that dollar. For me personally, it's been a very difficult thought process to go through in regards to how can we best serve our students and serve our schools. I think we have to keep in mind also that we are going to be taking on more debt than we've ever taken on in the past with a much-needed upgrade to our buildings. You know, if money wasn't an object, I would prefer to build a new high school. I hear a lot of people talk about the fact that it's embarrassing. I think it is. I think that the kids, unfortunately, some kids will drive by the school. I was talking to the principal one day, and one of the big concerns we had with kids just choosing to go elsewhere with the Pathways program was that they weren't even giving the high school a chance. And one of those reasons could be simply just because of what they believe is inside of that building. It looks like an institution from the outside, but once you get inside, it's a lot nicer. I get that. But we're not doing anyone a service in our town if we don't invest in our buildings. In terms of property tax transfer, I would have to be in support of the recommendation from the town manager.
Thanks, Brian. So just some questions. The tax rate at 3.31% is in the budget is $16.12 per, and then the 4% would be $16.23 still, potentially, if we wanted to. Yeah, 16. Oh, 1617, I'm sorry.
But we're using numbers based off of the current valuations, not the new ones
That's
that
correct.
are out.
Where we're at right now, just normal growth.
Do you have any anticipated, if we look at the revaluation, do you have any anticipated figure on that? I think that 16, 17 scares people, so if we can.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up like 14.
It'll be about 1432.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But the value of your property is going up to 12, 13%, so it's still going to be.
Was the average 16? Was there a 16% increase, or was it?
No, it's 12 to 13%.
12 to 13%.
So, there were a lot of figures flying around Facebook over the weekend talking this. I think it's important that there is public understanding of, taxes, tax levies, tax burdens. At 1432, that's a 1.432% tax on people's property, which is pretty small percentage when you think about it. When you're talking about the increase to that, you're talking about 4% of that 1.432%. So I just want people to keep in mind these numbers when they're thinking about the budget. And that's why the implications between 3.31 and 4% come out to, $37 a year, something like that. That's not to make light of increased burdens like that. I think they're very real for some people. I think the majority of people in South Kingstown certainly can afford that type of extra increase on their taxes. I've heard people come to the podium on the one hand saying that, the 2.5% is forcing taxpayers out of the town. I've heard a lot of other people say that a 1% property tax transfer to the school is forcing school-age families out of the town and making it an unwelcome place for, the young families that we do want to encourage to move to town. I think there's a whole separate issue that, we've been sort of touching tangentially, which is that the town council needs to do a better job of enacting policies that increase the stock of affordable housing in town. It really doesn't have much to do with this conversation tonight, but it is something that I think we're all committed to making happen.
Mr. President, if I may, there's one other piece that I think the public isn't clear on, and I'd like to just reiterate it, and that is that the state actually, Professor Johnson made the point earlier that the state is trying to get municipalities to sort of pick up the slack. But they've also at the same time put a cap on how far you can go. By state law, we're not allowed to go with a property tax levy that's greater than 4% of the tax, 4% greater than the property tax levy we had last year. So we're constrained in that regard. The reason the numbers on the screen are up there is because this is what the state law allows us to go to. 2.5, given the current budget structure, is simply not possible under state law.
Right, yes, without cutting somewhere else or, grabbing that 500,000 in debt service from there is a wall there. That's, I think, understood in general. And I can sense that there's not appetite for that. I just want people to be aware of what the implications are. If we want to do 2.5%, it means cutting from programs from the municipal side or stealing money from our rainy day fund. People can justify that, certainly, or they can, say it impacts our, potential, bond rating. These are the things that we have to balance, I think, tonight. And so that's, I think where we stand. I support a 2.5% increase, personally. I think the schools are cutting positions that are important, especially for the most vulnerable people in our schools. When people say that there's scare tactics being used at what will be a 1% increase and throwing around sports and music, if that doesn't happen, where they're going to cut is more of the special education. And that's already been cut tremendously. And you see it in the gap in performance between people who are poor, people who are disadvantaged in learning, and that's against the fundamental principles that we've enacted in this country. Everybody deserves an equal education. So yes, it's drastic to cut sports and music, but at this point I'd say it's more drastic to be cutting special education in this town, and that's what's going to happen. 11 more teachers' aides. And those are people who are caring for those students in our classrooms. So I think we are a wealthy enough community to find a way to make 2.5% work. I would like to do that without cutting the municipal budget. Those new numbers are disappointing, I have to say. They make it much more difficult to do that. But, are there any more comments at the table?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of other comments. On the municipal side, Bryant referred to the arborist truck and the new position. This is a public safety issue. So we've had trees come down on top of cars on some of our roads. There's been a need for, in the public safety sector, a traffic position, because on those same roads that those trees are a danger, if you lived on one of those roads, and I did until 5 years ago, I lived on a road that was a cut-through, it's a real public safety issue. It's not just a want in the community, it's a need. We didn't back out of our driveway. We made sure that we pulled out because the speed limit was 25, but everybody did 45. So my point is, on the municipal side, there are needs that we are not going to do with this budget. Again, I'll repeat, I think we do adequately fund education. I understand that things cost more year to year, but again, this has a compounding effect. True that in small bites every year it's not a big deal, or it's not as big a deal, but when you start compounding this and it becomes hundreds of dollars, it does have an impact on a sector of our population. So those are my comments.
The other thing I wanted to add really quick, based off of one of your comments, Abel, we are working towards figuring out what affordable housing should look like and what we can do to help it along in our town. That's a statewide problem that has been around for a very long time. There is a 10% goal or a law establishing to have 10% of every city and town's housing stock qualify as low and moderate income. But how do you get there? I mean, there's only certain things I think a town or a municipality could do. It's really the free market, and definitely changing some zoning will help. There are things like a lot of people in our town don't know, that you can actually have a auxiliary building legal in law that you can rent out to folks, or someone in your family just can't be more than 750 square feet and have more than one bedroom and one bathroom. So my concern is that I don't see the affordable housing as the long-term fix. Right now we're at 5.61% in our town. Some of the towns that have the highest amounts are Central Falls at 11%, Newport's at 15%, so that they're doing a pretty good job. Block Island is an example of a place where they are meeting their goal, but I think it was forced upon them. So we're going to do everything we can to try to improve the ability for folks to be able to live in our town. Everyone, not just older folks, young folks. I mean, we want this to be an all-inclusive community, and we want to make sure at the same time that we're representing everyone in town to the best of our ability, even the old lady that hasn't been able to fix that leaky roof. So the town council's job is to appropriate funding for the school committee. You know, the school committee could show us a budget that they want to buy all apples, but they can choose after the fact to buy oranges. So at that level, we don't have control. The only control we have is on what we appropriate. And it's definitely a difficult decision and a difficult place that we're in, but we've been here for many, many years, and I don't think we should keep kicking the can down the road.
I just want to make sure everyone understands that fixing the school facilities is not what this budget's about. That's about the $75 million bond that's going to happen. So I am fully in support of that bond. I sit on that building committee. I understand the state of the properties, and we need to do it. I just want everyone to make sure they understand that we're speaking to the operational budget here, not the fixing of the schools or the safety.
Right. And we're also putting the $500,000 aside to be responsible, so that we're in a positive place. Even with putting the $500,000 aside, I forget what year we're going to be in a negative at that point. 2024. So if we don't do that now, it's going to be even more catastrophic.
Okay, one more comment, Abel. So I know we all get this, but the dialogue, the terminology that we're using, I've been in business for decades, and I work with budgets all the time, and we continually refer to these as cuts, and someone said it earlier, they're not cuts, they're adjustments to a budget that has increased. So I think that's an important distinction to make, because some of the emails that I got over the last 2 weeks, it was puzzling to me. The way that some people worded it made me think that they don't truly understand that. Now, I know that most of us do. But again, they're not truly cuts. I understand that if the adjustment to the budget, it has a consequence, and it may require some cuts and some spending, but they are adjustments. It's not a cut. If we're transferring over, 1% more or 2% more, it's an increase in spending.
This is true. It's important to just keep in mind that at a 1% transfer, which is $540,000 in increased transfer, that doesn't even make up for what they lost in state aid, however. So,
Substantially less, in fact.
Right.
Rob, the $500,000 that we're talking about, is that increase, that's coming out of the town side, right, on the budget? Or is it?
Well, it's paid for by taxes.
Right, okay.
So,
but that's part of our overall
It's local tax revenue. It's revenue that has to be generated locally. It's not coming from state.
But it's a new expense.
It is a new expense. That's correct. So again, I've made the point that, in fact, the commitment that the town council would be making if they were to adopt the preliminary budget as proposed would be a nearly 2% local tax commitment to the school program. $534,000 for operating and $500,000 for debt service on the bond that we anticipate will be successful in the fall.
Okay, well, I think if nobody has anything else to say on the schools, let's move to any other portions of the budget that we need to discuss. I think we should vote on everything once we've sort of...
I mean, it would help to know where we were, I guess, but go ahead. I'm fine.
All right. So let's. Is there anything aside from the human service agencies that people wanted to look at in terms of adjusting the budget?
I think it'd be a very difficult thing for us to justify cutting schools to an extent and not look at the municipal side of the budget and look for ways that we can make cuts as well. I understand that a lot of the increases in the department are driven by contractual increases or wages. I'd like to suggest that we identify all the wage increases that are not contractually driven and look at ways to potentially bring that down, to bring down the increases in the municipal budget.
Okay. Happy to do it. Yep, you have. So the increases that are not contractual are increases in the non-union workforce. The principal among these are adjustments that were made to a series of supervisor and director positions in town hall. Those adjustments were made based on a series of concerns expressed by town employees that the grading system used by the town was inequitable, that it was grading, classifying positions based on the individual as opposed to the character of the work that was being done. The Director of Administrative Services and I, back in the spring and summer, looked at those concerns and did a review using the Office of Personnel Management, the federal government's Office of Personnel Management's classification scheme modified to local use, but using that scheme to reclassify positions to ensure that we were not building bias into the compensation scale based on an assessment of individual qualities or characteristics, but rather based on the character of the work that was being performed. Those evaluations resulted in, Trish is going to get me the number in a second, I think it's 5 positions being reclassified. Those reclassifications resulted, and Trish will get me the number in a second, but I think it's about $45,000 worth of changes in compensation. So if it's 4 or 5, we're talking on average somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 in changes. We're still thumbing through it. But again, I want to reiterate that the whole reason for the exercise was to deal with an assertion of inequity and the idea that in public work, the work should be compensated, not the individual. This is standard practice in government, is to make sure that what you're doing when you're classifying a position is that you're making sure that you're judging the work, not the individuals who are coming in. When you introduce personality, when you introduce an assessment based on your sense of what someone is willing to take or what someone is willing to accept, you're diminishing the work. Again, the classification is tied to the position and it's tied to the job, not to the individual in that position. There are a couple of ways that you make sure that you are adjusting for an individual. You have typically in a public job classification system, you've got grades and you've got steps. And our system has been heavy on grades. We have 18 different grades and light on steps. We have 3-4 steps for most of these positions. So the issue in our system is that you come in at whatever grade you were brought in on. And again, the claim or the concern expressed by employees was they were being downgraded based on their demographic characteristics. The people who had occupied the position before them were graded higher than these new hires were graded, and that those downgradings were based on, again, the demographic characteristic. The step scheme then moves you along to promotions on a regular basis based on your years of experience, based on how much time you spend in the position. So, again, the concern is that if you're downgrading at the beginning, you're doing what you were supposed to be doing with steps. Bring your inexperienced person in at the grade associated with that work, begin at that step, and then move forward as experience grows. Instead of doing that, the concern was that we were just grading people lower and keeping them at that lower grade through their career until they got to a point where you could get at the top step in the grade, and then you might make an adjustment or might not make an adjustment depending on your assessment of the individual. We were doing different things with the grading system than grading systems are typically designed to do.
So
All right, so here we go. Great. All right. So the reclassifications that were conducted and built into this proposed budget are as follows. I'm gonna fix that for me. Sorry. And magnify.
Rob?
Yes.
Now you got it again. Go.
Got it again. All right, so the police chief's position, grade 17 pay level adjustment, resulted in a $15,470 adjustment to pay and benefits. Director of Administrative Services, a reclassification from a pay grade 15 to a pay grade 16 based on, again, this evaluation of the work done by the prior person in that position and an objective analysis of the nature of the work. That reclassification resulted in $8,935 in salary and benefits adjustments. This is the whole suite of retirement and all of the benefits associated with every position. Director of Planning, reclassification from a grade 15 to a grade 16 pay level adjustment, resulting in $4,163 for salary and benefits adjustment. The Director of Leisure Services, this is a pay grade 16 pay level adjustment, $4,915 in salary and benefit adjusted. Executive Assistant, reclassification from a grade 10 to a grade 11. This is a non-union position, again, reclassified based on an assessment of the character of the work being conducted. Salary and benefits adjustment of $4,360. Communication Superintendent, this is the radio project we keep hearing about. It's a growing position. Reclassification at this point, based on the character of the work the position requires before we build out a whole system. And I will point out that with this position, we anticipate that the character of the work is going to continue to change and that a future reclassification in all likelihood will be merited. But given the nature of the work being conducted currently, the position classified out at a 14 as opposed to its current 13, resulting in a salary and benefits adjustment of $6,444. The arborist position is a new position, and the expense associated with that position is $73,000. And the admin support associate is a reclassification from a 6 to an 8 based on a change in the nature of the work being conducted at the Department of Public Services. Essentially, this position is becoming a sort of systems and data analyst position, requiring much more sort of interaction with staff and computer systems. So those are the reclassifications and the new position for the arborist.
So I think, except for the new position, I think it's under $50,000.
Yeah, my recollection was 44. I got 120 total minus 73.
Corrects what management perceives as an inequity.
To be honest with you, I perceive it not only as an inequity, I do perceive some of this as a potential legal liability. I don't think that the claims were completely baseless. My reclassification of the positions, the analysis done, suggests that there was downgrading of positions to some extent. Now, is that a completely indefensible thing? No, we could defend it, and I would defend it to the ends of whatever courtroom we had to, but I do think that the system of classification could be, has been, and should be shored up as we go forward.
I would say that we leave it. We leave the manager's budget.
Any other questions? Sort of general
Rob, are there any areas in the municipal budget where you believe we can cut spending? We're looking at a 6% increase in municipal spending as compared to the prior year.
Yeah.
Now, considering that it seems like we've come to the conclusion that a 1% property tax transfer will be where we're at with the school budget, I just find it hard for us to justify that to the residents, knowing that we do all know the schools is the most important service that we do offer in SK.
So, yeah, this is a very uncomfortable year for this reason. We renegotiated 3 union contracts this past spring and summer, and the increase that we're seeing is in part because you saw a 2.5% increase on average, a little bit higher with the paramedics. You saw an increase for the union members in those 3 bargaining units. So one of the problems we had is the anticipated, in the budget last 2 years ago now, the anticipated increase was only at 2%. We were not anticipating that we would have a 2.5% increase in those bargaining unit salaries. So we had under budgeted in the budget for that year, and we have to catch up. Do I think that we are about right with compensation for those bargaining units? Yes. At this point, I think we're about right. I do think that the bargaining units we're looking at, the bargaining unit we're looking at this year is in a very different place in terms of sort of what the market is signaling to us about the desirability of South Kingstown as a place to work. We had a very, I wouldn't say unique, but a very clear demonstration of the problems that can arise when you're not offering fair pay with regard to the paramedics bargaining unit this past summer. We literally were not able to hire paramedics. They were not looking at South Kingstown as a place to work because the compensation rate was simply not competitive. We were burning overtime money like it was going out of style because we could not man the paramedic vehicles. We adjusted the pay being offered, and we have been hiring, we've been recruiting, we've been able to attract new employees. That's a market signal that says you just haven't gotten it right. Now we're in a place where I feel much more comfortable with our paramedics, and I think we have got it right. What's going to happen in the next 3 years during the life of these contracts, time will tell. We have seen some hopeful indications. When we started negotiating these contracts back earlier in the year, early last year, it was looking like everybody was predicting significant growth in inflation. They were predicting inflation rates above 2.5%. We haven't gone there. It hasn't happened. And we're not looking at inflation rates projections that look like they're going to be in that range right now. So it actually is starting to look like the markets may tighten up a bit, and we may see South Kingstown and public employment looking better to job prospects or to job seekers in the future. I don't know. I don't know. But I don't see that as something we could have avoided, and I don't see it as something that we can steadfastly say isn't going to be an issue or an element going forward. The impact on the total budget is, even though it's a 6% increase here, is still, as a matter of absolute numbers, relatively small, as the exercise we just went through points out.
Any other questions about sort of general municipal side?
The only thing I'll bring up, and after hearing what the manager just had to say, I'm not sure how you accomplished this, but I truly believe that traffic position is as important as the tree problem that we have. So if there's a way to find the money for that, it's a public safety issue.
I think that number was 97,000, is that?
Yeah, I had the PD run some numbers today, and they're costing it out, not with uniforms, but benefits and retirement and, the things that they keep track of on their personnel side at about 84,000.
I'm sorry, say that once more.
84,000 is the cost estimate for just the personnel components, the salaries and benefits. In order to deal with uniform and, firearms, and there's some additional costs.
And then the other trick that municipalities do is they add the position halfway through the year, and it's half that. So just my 2 cents. I think it's something that has been before the council since I've been on for 4.5 years, and
it's probably one of the biggest complaints we get.
And it's not just because it's a complaint. I think it really is an issue if you lived on South Road or Rose Hill Road, or So again, I don't know where we find the money for that, but
Okay. Other comments? Do we want to, is everybody then happy with the outside agency funding as it's? Okay.
No, we'd like to go through it.
Go line by line. I don't have to be to work till 8.
So the proposed budget has $143,298 available for outside and human service agencies. If we look at the requests that were made by the outside agencies and human service agencies that made requests, there are $179,498 worth of requests. What I would suggest the council do is simply go line by line and pick a number. This little spreadsheet's been designed to show you where you are relative to the target. Now, the target is a proposal as well. If the council wishes to change the target, it is certainly within your purview to do so. Of course, that has an implication for the tax rate and everything, and we'll get there.
The League of Cities and Towns, is that a specific number that they asked for?
Those are the dues and really is not negotiable. That's the dues, that's the price of membership with the League. So I've left it zero because I didn't want to presume that you want us to continue to be members, but if we want to continue benefiting from membership in the League, we have to pay $13,448.
Thank you. It's got to go in there.
I'd say yes to that. We stay there.
That leaves you 129,850.
I wouldn't want to change the celebrations figure either. I think those parades are important to the town.
No, we increased the next line item last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember now, but not by much. But at the same time, they hadn't had an increase in, I think, 20-plus years or something like that, if I remember correctly. So I'm definitely okay with leaving that line item unchanged.
5,000 is what they requested again, and I think we should provide that to them.
$5,000.
Correct, 5,000.
I wouldn't touch this one either. I think the Johnny Cake Center provides such a value to this community that 30,000 is a bargain.
So full disclosure on the next one, I will recuse from all discussion and vote. Ultimately, my wife is an employee.
Yeah, and the chamber, as I recall the conversation, every year we've been sort of at the 9,000 figure. They have a special project that they wanted for another 20,000, so I thought we were thinking about half of that for 19,000.
Is there there were two line items, right?
Yeah, actually, on this one, I've listed, everything's in sort of rank order from the largest to the smallest. This is the request that the chamber made for signage and branding. There is another request down below for their maintenance of effort, which is line 19 here. That's a $9,000 item.
So I would put on the second line for now, the 9,000, I guess. But the question is going to be signage. Do we go back to that for now?
I think we need more information.
Right.
I think it's a worthy project, absolutely, what the director presented to us about trying to identify the villages, but there was no concrete plan at this point, and I think maybe next year, with a concrete plan, it would be worth a look.
I think we also talked about what can we do by leveraging town services for signage as well, and what that would look like. If I recall, the signs they were looking to purchase were wooden signs, is that?
That's my recollection. Yeah. And I agreed, my recommendation to the council on this particular item was half this sum, with the idea that the chamber would work with the town.
Any input over?
I agree with Deb and Brian. I think we should level fund the 9,000. As far as the 20,000, I don't think we have the specifications that we'd like. I think we should wait till next year for that.
But the other thought process is, should we put a little bit of money aside for that, so that the following year it's doable, or we can choose, like they could come back to us and say, okay, maybe it's too expensive to do all of the signs now, but maybe there are particular signs that would be more important or prioritized. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think without a concrete plan, again, I don't know. I think if they brought us a plan that said we want to put these 5 signs out and it's going to cost $25,000, we would know. But this was kind of a wish list, I think.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that at 0. That's the type of expense that we could take up even outside this budget process. Have we used our little town council spending change? Oh, there you go. Okay. Let's move on.
The next item is the Welcome House. Their request was for $20,000. Last year they had received $15,000.
I think, Rob, your recommendation was
$15,750.
Right?
That's correct. That was basically an adjustment to last year's. It was just, it's above inflation, but it was meant to be an adjustment.
But I guess the other thing is they are struggling, I think. So
I will note that I'm looking at a request unrelated to this. They've got a $2,000 request in for some assistance related to affordable housing and the provision of affordable housing. I was waiting for the council's decision here, but I anticipate granting that request for money from the Affordable Housing Fund.
In addition to the $15,750?
That's correct.
I think I could go along with the manager's recommendation on this one.
It's a tough one for me.
It is tough. It's tough. They're needy, and I get it.
I go along, I guess, with the manager's recommendation, and when we get to the bottom of it, we'll see if we can't give Welcome House the $20,000 they need.
Education Exchange this year is asking for $15,000. Their request last year was $3,000. Somebody got this right, Andy?
$3,500.
$3,500.
You remember, I can't recall from the meeting what the increase was for?
Government funding that they weren't receiving. Director told us $60,000 or $80,000, something like that. They were down.
They did lose $80,000 in federal and state. It wasn't clear to me, but I thought it was federal funding.
Federal.
Yeah.
I don't think our $14,000 makes up for that.
Can we put a placeholder in there for 10 and go back to it?
I'd be in favor of giving them closer to what they were asking for. They also said that they've been providing services that normal organizations like them charge municipalities for in an amount greater than that.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to Welcome House and we'll go back to Education Exchange. Just want to see what the numbers look like.
I don't think we should fund this. Newport Boys and Girls Club, I don't think we should fund $15,000 to an institution outside of this town. I think we have a lot of these offerings, and I don't think the amount of kids that are getting the benefit are there for us to invest this amount.
I have a difference of opinion. I think it's really important that we do fund the Boys and Girls Club of Newport's initiative that is run currently out of Curtis Corner and makes, I think, a significant difference in the kids that are served by that process there. And I think the bigger concern I have is why those kids feel not accepted in some ways in our town. I think that's a bigger issue to deal with.
I agree, Brian. I would fund them.
I know they're providing a service in our town, so I agree with you, Brian, on that. I think I could agree with the $15,000 as a 1 year funding.
Reevaluate.
And I think we need to come up with a plan, like not just the town, but the community in general, to see how we can make it a permanent thing, even if it's operated out of the guild. That's kind of underutilized in some respects now with the addition of the rec center. But I do believe there are things that we can do to help them, and those kids, in my opinion, need our help.
And the Boys Club was my favorite place. Are you ready? 1967.
I don't.
1984.
I agree. I think we need to fund them. So as interesting as this project sounded, I don't think we're going to have room to do this at this point.
I agree with Deb.
I like the concept. I think they were getting funds from other sources. This was going to make up a shortfall. I wonder if there's, maybe we do leave it at zero for now and address it in some other fashion.
Yeah, I feel similar with that one and the signage sort of issue. It's one of those little sort of...
I think Kane Child Development Center is a very important part of our community, and we should fund them. I know that our concerns are that they may they have bigger issues than $9,000, but I think we need to do what we can to show our support.
I agree.
Seeing a nodding of heads on.
So, yeah.
I would suggest that we level fund at 5,000.
Agreed.
And I think it's a bargain at that price.
What is this?
At
This is
VFW, I would be in favor of this funding. I understand, Rob, your point that improving a building that doesn't belong to the town, however, it's for handicap accessibility to a veterans building. I mean, in a $90+ million budget.
I agree, Joe.
What did we do last year? We gave them more, right?
8,000 last year.
Bought them a boat.
Last year, I think it was
so
for
they,
the boat, right?
They've requested 5,000, which would be in keeping with the traditional 5,000.
Really good work from this group, too, so they've 2,000 last year and they're requesting 5?
No, what happened was last year we appropriated more funds so they could buy a boat so they wouldn't sink out there.
Oh, so we could fund them at 2,000?
No, I think we should. I think we can.
Last year they received 8.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm
So
good
the
with 5.
additional 3 was for the boat.
Yeah, really good organization.
I would go for the 5.
Yep. Are we going to have enough?
No.
No.
Maybe.
I would be in favor of this 2,000. And against
The Narrow River is a great bargain to make sure that that's funded. They do the work of so many people with volunteers, and that's a portion of South Kingstown's portion that we pay for, as well as Narragansett pays in North Kingstown, I believe.
I agree.
I agree.
This is the organization that helps rebuild or make home repairs.
I think your recommendation, Rob, was 500 on this.
It was. The idea, my rationale was trying to wean them off the program, but again, I think my recommendation specifically stated that this would be an appropriate activity to fund, given the criteria that
Say inappropriate or appropriate?
would be appropriate. It's just really a question in my mind of whether the activity will be conducted absent the $1,000 or not, and I have every reason to believe that this group will continue doing the great work that they do.
I would be in favor of funding the 1,000. I mean, I don't know how everyone else feels. But.
Anybody else?
I agree with Bryant. I'm in favor of level funding at 1,000.
And
here as well, I think.
Same here.
Okay.
So you've got about $3,000, about $2,750 unallocated that we had proposed.
I would bring up Welcome House, maybe to 17,500. Cut it in the middle there, the 20 and the 15. That's a lot of it.
All right.
No, they'd be happy. 17.5.
And can we add 1,000 to the education exchange?
Are
Okay.
folks happy with that list now?
Yes.
All right. I think that's.
What are we off, though? Can we go back to that real quick? Where are we deficient in their request?
There's only two requests not met at all. That's the branding project by the chamber and the concrete couch. Reduced funding appears in one, the Welcome House request, two, the education exchange,
But there's still both an increase from last year.
That's correct.
It's an increase.
Those are the only reductions.
What were they last year? The 15,000, was it?
15,000 for the Welcome House and 3,500 for Education Exchange.
That's a big increase for us.
Originally, that's correct. It's been modified. The president.
Just to be clear, just because we have leftover monies doesn't mean we have to spend them, right?
That's correct. The target is your target, too. We proposed...
This exercise seems to be, we have leftovers, let's assign them where we'd like to.
But it's also something that we've been doing every year. It's more about helping the community and other agencies that are doing things that the government otherwise doesn't do for our members.
And we've cut 35,000 from last year's budget for this program.
Was it 33% or something like that? What was it drop?
33% from last year. This is a significant reduction in this category.
Because some of the places that are missing are, if I remember correctly, Thunder Mist, which was a large number, Easter Seals.
Last year was 213,000.
That's correct. I will say that the reason that is exactly as
we put different parameters in.
That's correct. We're trying to support the guys who need it the most.
But I think you mentioned that the other organizations' operating budgets were bigger than the municipal side?
That's correct. That was the criterion that knocked out many of the old applicants.
So I think the only one I really question is the Education Exchange. It's a big increase over last year, but again, in the big scheme of things.
Have you visited the?
Have.
Yeah. They do a lot of great work, I think, and I think we're lucky to have them.
And their shortfall is much, much larger than that. I mean, I know every bit helps, but...
And they weren't sending invoices to the town for the folks they're educating, which they could. Yep. So, we know that this, with this cost per pupil spending at $22,000, we're half that funded. So I think it's a bargain.
I'm convinced.
I express my questions at a time in town where I feel there, as we all know, there's increasing interest around the rising taxes. Now, I know we've come to a conclusion around what we're going to support for a property tax transfer increase, but we do know that there's a 6% increase on the municipal side of the budget. And we're going through this exercise, and we're talking about expending every single money that's available. At a time like this, I don't exactly agree with going beyond level funding for a lot of these programs. Unfortunately, a lot of these programs do rely on monies from the town. But at some point, we have to draw the line. I am in support of what we've come to up here right now, but I would like to make it clear that going forward, we need to have constraints around our spending. We really do, especially on the municipal side as well.
All right. So at this point, I think that may exhaust our questions on the proposed budget.
I have no further questions.
Rob, what was your budget for the outside agencies? We landed at 143.
Or in the recommendation.
But just to be clear, we have not spent every available dollar. We're still at
You're still 33% below last year's allocation to those activities in combination, and the recommendation was based on an attempt to get those numbers well below. And again, 33% is a significant one-third reduction in that category of spending, a one-third reduction from last year. And I would suggest that it's also a more narrowly focused set of grants by the community to outside agencies and human service agencies. I mean, it may not be perfect, but it was a rationally designed recommendation, and the council has not exceeded that recommendation.
So is there any appetite to talk about a traffic position. And
Have you identified a funding swap for that?
where I live, we should
Okay.
do that, yep.
I understand.
But I think it's a real public safety need. I'm not sure where even 6 months funding would come from.
What do we carry in our council? And we haven't.
That budget for the police officer, I just did a calculation, it's $85,000.
Right. Thank you.
We haven't used any of that money yet, right, for this year?
We're not getting air conditioning again, are we?
No.
Give up the rug, too, so
So,
I can give it up for the traffic officer, for sure.
is there excess? I know we have undesignated funds in every department. Is there anything in, for instance, we get, I want to call them user fees, but they're not user fees, but transaction fees for open space. Is there any extra money in that account?
Oh, you mean the transfer tax?
Transfer tax.
So the transfer tax currently goes towards open space, but also we decided to allocate towards affordable housing as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just, 200,000 of that.
Right.
We used how much?
200. We reallocated the bike path
Right.
extension
Yes.
to the unassigned fund balance. But we reallocated the original appropriation for the affordable housing, open space on the Boy Scout property.
Right.
And I just want to say, we have this major project coming up, this radio project, for which you will be seeing some budget surplus dollars at year end to earmark towards this project, similar to the streetlight procurement project. So there's not a lot of surplus dollars that I'm anticipating.
This is the preliminary budget, so we could always add the traffic enforcement officer
That's correct.
before we adopt, if we can find it somewhere.
That's correct. And there may be, I mean, speaking of streetlights, there may be, depending on how we make out with the state, we're still waiting to hear from the state. There may be some movement there.
To fill with some grant monies,
Okay, no, is what it is.
So I think it's a great idea and needed, and I think maybe we can.
We're happy to go look hard.
No, I'm sure you folks already, I mean, you know this thing inside, so I'm sure you have. So let's just keep it on the table before this final budget approval and see what we can do.
Yeah, and I think at the very least, it becomes a goal that we're working towards. There are certainly new positions on the town side that we want filled. It's not just...
Rob, where do we stand with the number last year was 170 calls that were mutual aid for EMS? Does that sound right?
Yeah, my recollection is that we have 117 that came in. Oh, he is, good. Craig, come on up.
I mean, we're talking about two important things, so I just want to get some more information on that.
Right.
I'm sorry, Brian, what was?
The concern that I have is the fact that there were many calls that we couldn't take care of overnight.
Correct.
So we're just looking for some numbers on...
Yeah, since July, it's 146.
Since July till...
Yeah, fiscal year.
And that's all, or is that a specific time during the day?
Of that, probably about 90 are at night, in the evening. I'm sorry, what, ma'am? Yeah, but typically they come to us more often than we go to Narragansett or Charlestown.
How often do we go out?
In a month, or
that was only since July.
Oh, I think I estimate we'll be about 260 for the year.
So he's saying 260 in terms of help from mutual aid from other communities. What Deborah's looking for is the number of our mutual aid to the other communities from EMS.
It will be probably less than 100, probably about 100. Yeah. And also the keep in mind is, in addition to the response times, is the amount of time that the one rescue we have is out of service on calls during the night, which could average from 4 hours to 7. The town is without EMS coverage in the evening.
So when it's tied up, they're tied up.
Correct, because the average call, we call it a time on task, where they may be on a call for about 50 minutes. They transport. Per protocol, they may go to Kent, they may go to Rhode Island. If they have a cardiac arrest, they're on the scene for a minimum of 30 minutes. So a cardiac arrest, it could be out of service up to an hour and a half, 45 minutes.
What is the response time averaging?
It really goes, our average is probably about 9 minutes within town. But generally, if you look at, I break it down to East Matunic, and Green Hill, and it goes at like 15 minutes, 18, 20 to 24. And the big picture at night is we just go for periods of time without a transport unit, several hours.
Is there an average industry-wide response time?
Yeah, NFPA says that we should have BLS within 5 minutes 90% of the time, ALS within 8 minutes. We don't meet those. And of course, some of those numbers are if you have a system where you have the fire department that runs first response, where we're the sole provider of EMS. While the fire department does help us, they do a great job. We're the sole provider of EMS.
And you could really use another...
I need 4 paramedic positions, and I can make this work.
And that's just for evening, right?
Yes, that would make the second truck 24 hours, and that would give us a very good coverage. My concern is the lack of transport unit at night. And as we approach the summer, as I've talked, our volume is constantly going about 17% a year.
Are we getting pushback from other communities or at all?
I am reminded from the other communities sometimes how much they come in, but also we help them out, but the majority of them help us out because we just don't have the coverage. Compared to Narragansett, our numbers are a lot larger than what Narragansett responds to.
And then we also lose the revenue from the run, correct?
Yeah, so far I've calculated about $130,000 in lost revenue. Now that's just what we discussed about billable, what we may collect, but what we could potentially bill out just at night is over $130,000 as of this week.
We don't charge people that live in town.
Just their insurance, we write off the rest. So, for example, if the bill is $1,000 and their insurance covered $500, we would write the $500 off.
But for out-of-town folks, it's different, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'm wondering if there's a motion on this budget, any proposed amendments?
I'll make a motion to approve the budget as, is it as presented? Because it's not as presented. We changed a few things.
In the past, have we separated out the property tax transfer to a separate vote? I think we have, but I could be wrong. And I'm willing to do it either way. The only clarification I'd like to make is we should separate out the Southern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce to a separate vote so that I can recuse.
So it's perfectly appropriate to do it as two motions if you'd like. You can do property tax transfer and then the human services as amendments to the proposed budget, and then adopt the proposed budget as the council's.
However the council wants to do it, it's fine with me.
I mean, whatever is convenient. I mean, it really is your choice on how to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason we did it separately before was because we were amending the proposed school property tax transfer. So if somebody wants to make a motion to change that, then that would make sense. But otherwise, if we're just proposing to keep it as it is in the budget, then vote on the budget.
So I'll make a motion that we approve the budget as presented, removing the Southern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce from that vote.
Just for clarification, as presented means what?
So I would suggest, as a form of the motion, that the council move to adopt the manager's proposed budget as its proposed budget, preliminary budget, with the Southern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce taken out. And that form would allow you to adopt the proposed budget as your own.
And would it be possible to put that budget on the screen so everyone can see exactly what we're...
Sure.
And,
is that possible?
And the proposed budget is how much of a property tax transfer?
1%.
1. Yes.
Does it make sense to do the chamber first and a vote, just 4 of us on that $9,000, then we do the...
We could do that.
Rest of it? All right.
I made a motion that... correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that for purposes of discussion.
So moved. Discussion.
So I'm not entirely comfortable at 1%. That's why I'd like to see at 1% property tax transfer to the schools. I'd like to see, I think, more than that. I think 1% is frightening, I guess. I don't want to see the drastic cuts. I think I would have more of a appetite for, so that the 1% puts our, there's the slide. So the 1% puts our levy increase at 3.31%, correct? Okay. I think I would be more comfortable at the 1.5%. I don't know. And the 2 puts us over 4, which, so we can't go there. It was 1.9 or something to touch 4. I don't know, touching 4 bothers me just because of the compound factor that next year the 4 on the 4 on the 4. But at 1%, I'm not comfortable at 1%. I'm much more comfortable at the 1.5. So I would make an amendment that we move that needle to the 1.5.
I mean, I think I would add to that we also are going to try to look for ways to improve EMS response times and also traffic enforcement. So when we do those 2 other things potentially, which we can't technically do at this point, we're well over that number.
All right. Yeah, hold on. Deb has proposed an amendment of moving the school PTT up to 1.5%. So do I hear a second on that? I will second that. and we'll have discussion. So you're thinking to move to 3.69 overall tax increase with the 1.5%. Rory, before you were saying 2%. Do you not feel that 1.5 is better than 1?
For the sake of allowing the schools to get an adequate amount of funding and the appropriation from the town, if that's the highest that they're going to get as a result of this, I'm willing to go to 1.5.
All right. So let's have a vote on that motion to change the school property tax transfer to 1.5%. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No.
All right, by a vote of 3-2, that carries. So now we're looking at a 3.69% increase in the tax levy. Discussion on this amended budget.
I initially felt as though a 2% increase was what would be adequate to the schools. Unfortunately, my colleagues up here disagree. In order to get to an amount that is on the higher end as opposed to the lower, I felt it necessary to get on board with the 1.5. I stood hard on my 2, but I didn't think we'd get there as a group. I felt it was smart to go 1.5 before it was determined to only be 1. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory. Other comments? Yeah, I mean, I think 1.5 is better than 1. Clearly, I'm in the minority in feeling that 2.5 is justified for the schools. But, we got to take steps one at a time.
I just keep coming back to wherever we land this year is the starting point next year, so.
All right, any further comment on this preliminary budget? Oh, right, yeah, but we need to vote on this too.
Right.
More, did you have something to add?
No, I think you've got it. You're good.
All right, well, if I hear no more commentary, all in favor of this budget at 3.69% say aye.
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 All opposed say no. No. Lovely. Okay, well, further discussion.
Was it 3-2?
No, 2-3 it failed. I voted no, Bryant voted no, Joe voted no.
I didn't hear you vote.
3.69 failed.
Abel, didn't you make the motion, second Deb's motion?
I seconded the motion, yeah. And I voted to approve the 1.5, but I can't approve a budget that cuts the schools that much.
So just to clarify, my understanding behind supporting the 1.5% was under the understanding that you were in agreement by seconding that motion.
I voted for that motion.
I would like to suggest to have the town solicitor present during this meeting. Unfortunately, he's not here to give advising around how we go about the voting. I'd like to ask why he's not here.
It hasn't been traditional for the town solicitor to attend these budget meetings. It's simply just not been the practice.
So this is a meeting where the council is voting on actions and the town solicitor is not here to give advising on those matters.
The town solicitor's parliamentarian advice is essentially the same advice the clerk would provide or the president has the authority to determine. The procedures in the town rules and procedures and the procedures in Robert's Rules of Order, if the town procedures are not, don't speak to the point, are controlling, and appeal is to the chair if a member feels the procedures are not being followed. The appeal would never be to the town solicitor. It would always be to the chair.
Yeah, it's okay, Rory. We've had motions like this fail before. So what we need to do is continue discussing until we come to a proposal that can get 3 votes, essentially. So,
But I think, from what I understand, what you're saying is potentially pushing the 3.69 levy to 4, is that?
I would be, did you say 1.9% is what we can get to, 3.98? Yes, I would be in favor of that.
I would note again, though, that that's very close and could change between now and preliminary and final adoption. So I wouldn't want to give anybody the impression that that number's locked in. We're still sort of dealing with a revaluation. Numbers are going up and down. That's tonight's number. That's the calculation based on the numbers we have.
Yep, certainly. This is a preliminary budget. So, we can talk about, increasing it. That's what I'm interested in. If 3 of you can agree on the lower figure, that's fine as well. I don't have to be one of the ones who votes in favor of the budget, but we need to come to some type of conclusion.
So I guess, Trish, we can't agree on 1.5. I don't know if we can agree on 1.9. Can you tell me what that does to the tax levy, right?
Which number, 1.
So from 1.5,
Brings us at 3.98.
3.98, what are the numbers associated with that?
You're talking as far as the tax increase? Yes. The amount of tax increase in dollars?
Right, what would my...
About $208 a year. Your tax bill will go up about $208.
To go from 1.5 to 1.9?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's on a average of a 300 and something.
354,000.
Okay. Right.
So at 1.5%, your estimated tax bill will go up $190. Increase that to 1.9%, it will go up to about $208.
So a difference of $18 per year.
And what does it look like at 1%?
At 1%?
Yes.
170.
Okay.
So that's a $38 increase.
$38.
Going to 1.9.
I think that $3.10 a month figure that I was talking about.
If we add in the 500,000, we're really putting more into that pool of money, right?
$500,000 is in all of these calculations.
Right, but what I'm getting at is so I guess if you go to 1.5 as an example, you're really at 2.5% or something close to that number.
You're at 2.5 local tax support for the school program, not school operations.
Correct.
We're not leaving much room for anything.
I don't like going to the max of anything.
1.25.
You'll do 1.25? I would agree to 1.25.
I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary budget with a 1.25% increase to the schools.
Second.
So moved. Discussion on this proposal. I mean, from my point of view, 1.5 was not sufficient, so clearly 1.25 is not going to be sufficient. I think Is there
I think we're moving in the wrong direction.
I would agree with that. So I'll call a vote on this one. All in favor of a 1.25% PTT to the schools, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
That motion fails. 2-3.
I'd like to make a motion for a 2% increase in the property tax transfer to the schools.
Mr. President, the state will not approve a 2% property tax transfer to the schools without an adjustment to some underlying element of the budget. You need to take away, we cannot go to the state with above 4% property tax levy increase.
I'd like to motion a 1.9% increase in the property tax transfer appropriate to the schools.
Do I hear a second? I'll make a second. All right, discussion on a 1.9% transfer.
Just think we're not leaving any room for anything.
I don't think we're being responsible. My personal opinion.
Very good. Any thoughts on a 1.9%, Deb?
Yeah, it's too close to the cap for me. I have to agree that we leave ourselves no room.
All right. I mean, if we end up spending more than we adopt as a budget, what happens in that case?
A lynching.
I have a calculation on 1.75.
Thank you.
Okay. It's a
Hold on.
3.87% increase in the levy.
3.87?
3.87, $202.
That still doesn't leave a lot of room in that cap. Leaves only 1/8 of a point.
So, Mr. President, to your question, we can't deficit spend. Our most immediate challenge is that tonight's preliminary budget needs to be submitted to the state for review for compliance with state law. So our challenge is making sure that we present to the state a budget that does not exceed the 4% cap.
Right, and any discussion of this space left isn't really material to the...
It really isn't. That's correct. We cannot deficit spend, though. So if we were to come in, with whatever the number is, we have to stick with it.
Right, we could go to 4% and spend less than that, but we can't...
That's correct.
Okay, clear on that. All right, any further discussion on 1.9%? All right, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no.
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 And that motion fails as well. All right, further conversation.
So
I'll make a motion at 1.35.
I'll second that motion.
So moved. Any discussion on this one? All right. We'll just call a vote then. 1.35%. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
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 There we go. All right. We're back to where we were.
So I'll make the motion at 1.75.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
So moved. Discussion at 1.75. I appreciate you finding a way towards the middle here.
You didn't appreciate my effort?
You didn't move in my direction, Joe. All right. Any further comments on 1.75? No. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
And that motion carries 3-2. So we now have some new figures. Do I have a motion in favor of this preliminary budget as just proposed?
I'll make a motion that we approve this budget.
Do I?
Second.
So moved. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No. No.
And by a vote of 3 to 2, that preliminary budget passes. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, right. Yeah, we still have to vote for a line item of $9,000 for the Southern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce.
I make a motion that we fund the Southern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce $9,000.
Second.
So moved. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Recuse.
That motion carries unanimously 4-0 with one recusal. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that motion carries unanimously. It is 9:45.
It was worse a couple years ago. I think we voted 15 times 2 years ago. Yeah. It's fine. It's everyone gets a vote. And it's preliminary still.
Got to be done, right? You. No one leaves happy.